Growing up with parents who don't like each other can be really tough, but it can be equally as tough when you're dealing with situations as an adult. My parents were married many years ago and came from an arranged marriage. They don't necessarily believe in divorce and separation, and that makes things tricky for the people who are around them when they are either fighting, arguing, or being quite critical to each other. So I'd love to know in the comments, have you experienced this? Have you been brought in to be the mediator or the fixer for marital problems with your parent? I find that this is a common thing that I often hear about when I'm working with children of immigrant parents. And I myself am included in that category. In this video, we're going to be talking about tips to help us to protect ourselves from getting in the middle of our parents' toxic marriage. Before we go into the tips, I think it's really important that we define toxic. I don't really like the word toxic because it takes away from the fact that these individuals have probably experienced trauma in their past, and that trauma is causing them to behave in certain ways. For the purposes of this video, we're going to define a toxic relationship as one that consistently undermines an individual's sense of well-being, happiness, and at times safety. These relationships make the individuals feel unsupported, misunderstood, attacked, or demeaned. I want to add a disclaimer to this definition. If there is a fear of safety for someone's well-being, be it physically, emotionally, or otherwise, we need to get the proper authorities involved. So that may look like calling the police or 911 to make sure and ensure that person is safe. Now that we've defined what a toxic relationship is, we're going to move to tip number 1, which is don't get sucked in. I know this is so hard. Sometimes what happens is we need to shift the pattern of behavior that's been established. So if the pattern is, let's say one of the parents comes to you to complain or wants you to advocate for them, we need to set some limits and boundaries on this. We can start to redirect them to take appropriate action for themselves. We can also suggest that they speak to a therapist, counselor, friend, or religious figure if they feel more comfortable to do that. It is not our responsibility to be the fixer and mediator or therapist for our parents. Once we are able to step back, that gives them the space to start to deconstruct their behavior or reflect on maybe some changes that they can do for themselves. If you're finding this video helpful so far, or it normalizes some of the experiences that you've been through, please let me know. I would love to hear about it in the comments. My name is Cassandra Mullick. I created this channel so that we can have a safe space as children of immigrants to normalize, discuss, and validate the shared experiences that we go through with having a family that comes from a different country. So if that's content that you're interested in, please hit that like button to help others know that this channel is here, and also feel free to subscribe so that we can continue the discussion. Tip number 2, practice radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is a concept from a therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy. And what radical acceptance talks about is radically accepting what is. So as much as we would like to change our parents' behaviors or relationship, we have to take it as face value for what is going on and accept the reality that we may not be able to change those behaviors and that it may never shift. Again, this is difficult to do, but it helps us to prepare for the fact that we need to establish some boundaries and maybe some limits around how much we interfere or interject in these relationships. Tip number 3, set limits. Let's say that you're visiting your family of origin's home, and maybe you have children with you, maybe you have spouses or partners, and you're going there for dinner, and you're starting to notice or hear comments that aren't kind, or maybe your parents aren't talking to one another, maybe there is contempt, maybe there's passive aggressiveness. It's important for us to say something. So here we can start to set limits. Limits can look like voicing, if you're going to continue this behavior, we're going to be leaving. We can also voice what the impact is. It's unfair that the kids see this kind of behavior. It's unhealthy for them. And if it continues, we're going to leave. What this does is it sets your parents up for understanding that their behavior also affects other people. The more silent that we stay in these types of situations, the more people understand it to be normal and okay to do. So it's really important to set those limits because silence indicates that it's acceptable. And we don't want to do that anymore. Step number 4, take back your power. If you know that there is a disagreement between your parents or it's just uncomfortable to be around them, it's perfectly okay for you to set some time limits. You can tell your parents beforehand that you have X amount of time for this visit and then you have other things to do. Some of us hearing this tip will think, man, I feel like I'm being mean or unkind. We need to reframe this thought. It's not being unkind. It's not being mean. Here, we're actually honoring ourselves and what we need to keep our cool or mental sanity. So let's start reshaping that. Let's start reframing that. You're empowering yourself to be able to navigate this situation. It's not being unkind. If we start to feel feelings of guilt, then we need to ask ourselves, is this guilt valid? Am I doing something deliberately wrong, like actively harming someone? Or is this false guilt, where I feel like I'm doing something wrong, but if I step back and evaluate, I'm actually not. A part of changing our patterns is to get curious about the reasons why we feel or think in a certain way. So here I'm going to encourage you to get really curious and to start asking yourself questions. When have I felt this false guilt before? Where in my life have I felt shamed or guilted for something that actually isn't deliberately hurting someone? And the more questions that we ask and the more we get to know ourselves, the better the situation can be. Tip number 5, false responsibility. A lot of us grow up feeling like we're responsible for our parents and their relationship as well as their well-being. What we need to start recognizing is they are adults, and a part of adulting is taking responsibility for one's actions. They may not know how to interact or they may not have the skills, but that doesn't mean that they're incapable of learning. What we can do is start to plant seeds for them, be it suggesting different books or different conversations, different videos. We need to remember that it's not our responsibility to fix. We don't have to be in a parentified role as an adult for our adult parents. That's not the way that this works. So remember, create a mantra for yourself. It is not my responsibility to fix. We can support, but we cannot fix it. We can only control our own behavior, and other individuals can only control their own behaviors. We want to jump out of the fixer role that we play within our families and move towards more of a collaborative, supportive role. It's important to remember that by practicing these 5 tips, we're actually giving our parents a gift by shaking up the patterns of behavior that they're used to from their partners, as well as what they're used to from their children, us. When we start to plant seeds, when we start to set limits, when we start to set time frames, you're letting them know that their behavior is unacceptable. And you're putting it back into their court to figure out how to adjust their behavior. If this video was helpful and you'd like to learn more about parental guilt trips, I'll link the video series that I created below in the description box. Take care, everyone.